And so I'll start today. Now, my name is Marilyn Olive. I'm the chair of the Hobsons Bay Wetlands Centre. Many of you I know already know who we are, but we are a community organisation, and our vision is to connect everyone to nature. We know that being in nature is good for our health and well-being, and it also helps us to better understand and care for the natural environment. And we all do know, whether we admit it or not, that the natural environment is of vital importance for our well-being and, in fact, our survival into the future. Now I've got great pleasure to introduce Rob Mancini. Some of you will know Rob already. Rob is the creative director for the Hobsons Bay Wetlands Centre. His work is voluntary, and we are very, very grateful and very pleased to have him on our team. Rob is a professional graphic designer and artist who works almost exclusively in the conservation and environmental communications sector. He's a passionate amateur naturalist as well, and a conservationist. In his personal art, he often features some of his favourite subjects of interest, and you'll see some today: wetland birds. He spent a lot of time exploring and immersing himself in nature in Hobsons Bay, and so I will let this one more person in and then say, over to you, Rob. The workshop is yours.
Hi guys. Yeah, well, an additional welcome from me personally. It's going to be an interesting one because I'm not exactly sure why people have decided to join us. I don't know how many of you are solid birders or keen beginners. So while I'll be covering some pretty basic stuff, but I'm hoping there'll be some info in amongst there, and I'll go and be guided a little bit by some of your questions as to how much info I give. But I'm pretty well going to cover some basic birds of the area, a little bit about them, migratory and resident, and a little bit about some of the sites, which I'm sure quite a few are familiar with as well. So, but basically it's going to be structured with beginning with the birds, and I'll work through some of the sites and then have a look at my art and some of the inspiration for my art. Okay, so I will screen share. Okay, so I'll open this up and we'll go full screen mode. Okay, so we're fortunate in this area to have a considerable number of migratory waders that do visit our and the site for our wetland centre is a particular bit of a hot spot. So the mouth, we're going to be hopefully planning to build the centre near the mouth of the Laverton Creek. And the mouth of the Laverton Creek is quite a hot spot. Now we do get a lot of we get good numbers of waders. It's a little bit confusing for beginners because they tend to get a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of waders, and they're all sort of small and brownish and scuttle along the mud, and they're the same colour as the mud. But really, in terms of the common stuff we have here, there's not so much. There's really not that many birds. Unfortunately, if you do get a rarity and you don't know what you're looking at, well, you may not even know you're seeing it. So what we do have is so the most common probably few waders I'll just run through. So we have the redneck stint, which is the smallest of our migratory waders. So here we have the redneck stint up here, and again, something that confuses particularly beginners is, well, it's called a redneck stint. Why the hell is it called a redneck stint? Well, the image on the right here in breeding plumage is a good example of why. Now, often before they're just about to leave for the breeding, so these guys are the ones that actually I'll talk about sandpipers more generally. So the migratory waders and the sandpipers particularly, are members of the Scolopacidae family, and a lot of people think it has to be sandpiper in the name for it to be a sandpiper. Now that's not the case. So the members of the Scolopacidae family, and so there's a bit of confusion with this, but here we have the redneck stint. So we have stints, we've got curlews, we've got whimbrels, we've got tattlers, we've got knots, godwits, greenshanks, turnstones, dowitches, sandlings, ruffs, and a bit more loosely connected, phalaropes and snipes. So these are all members of the Scolopacidae family, and they're all sandpipers. So the most common ones, oops, sorry guys, the most common one we've got around here are the redneck stint. They're quite small, very small guys, weigh about 30 grams, and they're often seen in, they're often seen in company with things like sharp-tailed sandpipers, which is on the bottom left there. Now these guys are probably about half as big again as the redneck stint, but they are when they're on their own, it's a bit hard. Size is not a particularly reliable way of IDing waders, but when they're in mixed flocks, it is useful because you've got the smaller guys and the bigger guys, and you can compare the general colouring. But really, in terms of the three main birds we're going to see in this area, in terms of migratory waders, are redneck stints, sharp-tailed sandpipers, and on the right used to be one of our more common species, the curlew sandpiper. But unfortunately, their numbers have been dwindling over the last decade or so. But they're quite distinctive with the down-curved bill, probably a little bit smaller than the sharp-tailed sandpiper, but with a down-curved bill. And this one here is actually a flagged bird. Some of these shots are mine, some of these aren't. This is a shot of mine, but that's an orange flagged bird, which means it was flagged in Victoria. So if you see one of those, you can report it to the wader study group, and all that data is quite useful from that point of view. Now, so here we have some of the more common sandpipers again. We have a thing called a greenshank, which is a beautiful, larger bird, and its sort of smaller ally, the marsh sandpiper. Now, this has a relation. They're very similar in colouring, and at a distance, it's really hard to tell which one it is. But if they're side by side, it's quite clear. But we do have there is a distinct difference where, if you look at the left, it's a bulkier, but generally from a distance they look like very white, pale birds with soft grey upper parts. But if you look at the greenshank, it's more robust. Its bill is heavier. It's slightly upturned, whereas the marsh sandpiper has a really fine needle-like bill. Now the bottom left. So I don't know how many of you know much about the migrate. I mean, most of us probably know about the migration stuff with migratory waders. But the bottom left, while it's not a great shot, it is one of mine, and I thought I'd include it. It's zoomed in heavily, but it's of some bar-tailed godwits, and it was around the time that they were probably arriving back from their northerly migration, their breeding grounds in Alaska. And this guy, as you probably know, I mean, most migratory waders will travel about 10,000 kilometres or more to the breeding grounds and then 10,000 kilometres back every year. And that ultimately ends up in being the equivalent of here. You know, the common thing that's thrown out because it blows you away is they'd probably travel from here to the moon, the equivalent of from here to the moon in their lifetime. But the bar-tailed godwit has a few feathers in its bow, literally. Sorry, the pun. About the pun. It's actually there's been a new record broken, but I'm still going with the old record because it's done the longest flight, single non-stop flight of any bird, and the original record was by E7. It was in 2007, and it was about 11,000 kilometres in 9 days, non-stop. Now, there's been a new record, supposedly, and I'll claim the E7 as the record, but the 4BBRW this year has done 12,840 kilometres in 11 days. So I think the record is about the distance it travelled a little bit more, but in my mind, I reckon 9 days for 11,000 is pretty bloody good. And for me, it's the E7's the winner. And additionally, the bar-tailed godwit has been found to be during migration can fly up to 5 to 6 kilometres in altitude, which just blows you away as well because you know we'd be struggling to be able to walk in those conditions, let alone fly in it. Okay, so bottom right here, we've got a bird which is, in Australia, it's a misnomer because it's called a common sandpiper, but pretty rare. They found, most of all the other waders are found, well, actually, the stints and sharp-tails and curlews are found in flocks, whereas greenshanks, smaller numbers, marsh sandpipers, smaller numbers, individuals, pairs, bar-tailed godwits are found in larger numbers. Whereas the commons, I've only seen them in singles and pairs. And if you see a little bird sitting on a rock on the edge of somewhere like the Laverton Creek and it's just nodding its head, bobbing its head up and down, well, it'll be a common and it's on its own. That'll be, nothing else could possibly be. Okay, now we're moving on to the Chirasidae family, which are the plovers. Now these are migratory as well. So we do have resident plovers and migratory plovers. So these guys are the migratory. Now, while I haven't seen a grey for a long time around here, I have heard they've been sighted this year near the mouth of the Croy Creek. But on the left-hand side, generally speaking, they're similar in size. The grey plover, so this is non-breeding plumage up the top of the grey and the non-breeding plumage of the golden. Now, look, from a distance on a dull day, there's not much in it. So they're pretty tricky from that point of view. But in breeding plumage, you can see how amazing the transition is. And the reason being, if you see these guys on the tundra, when they're nesting, that plumage is really useful in the vegetation that they're in. They really just do disappear. So they're very pretty in breeding plumage, but then again, I think they're pretty in non-breeding plumage as well. Okay, so again, slightly with the migratory waders. So generally speaking, there's breeding and non-breeding plumage, but I don't know if anybody has seen the ruff in its non-breeding and breeding plumage. I've been lucky to see them both, and I was able to travel to Norway and Finland during the breeding season only once, and I was actually so on the left-hand side we have the non-breeding ruff, and on the right-hand side we have the breeding. They develop these crazy, ornate, flamboyant, baroque sort of over-the-top feathers, and they're all different. And there's no sameness in the colours. They ranges from white through to orange, russets, and brown. So it's really quite crazy, and they all gather at a thing called a lek, where they fight for the females, basically, or to impress females. I'm not sure how the female decides who's the best, but it's pretty impressive. They sort of look like mops getting flopped around. They're just really odd, and they sort of leap around at each other and in this really flop, limp sort of crazy way. But it's quite a sight. Now, in terms of the breeding, obviously it's an incredibly narrow window for the breeding. We have so they arrive. And actually, that's an interesting thing in that they arrive. So a very narrow window, but they're spending. Apparently they're considered to be summer visitors to Australia, but in actual fact they spend and so they're not. I don't tend to think of them as visitors because they're spending 2/3 of the year here. But I suppose they're ultimately where you're born is where home is. So I suppose that's why they're considered to be visiting us. I almost feel as though they're visiting the breeding grounds to breed. But so 2/3 of the year they spend in Australia. But the window to breed is incredibly narrow. I've seen photographs of birds on nests covered in snow because they're arriving just after the snow melt. And if there's a late flurry of cool weather, then they're often caught out by that. And so that being the case, when their chicks hatch, they're basically precocial. So they're like chickens. As soon as they're out of the eggs, they're often running and feeding themselves. Parents don't feed their chicks. They may feed them a couple of little things initially, some insects, but pretty much they're on their own and they're up and running. The adults will hang around for a little while, just keeping them safe from predators. But ultimately, they're not with them for very long. And on the right-hand side here, you can see what a sandpiper chick looks like. They're pretty cute, and they're just fully mobile. And like a lot of these birds, look at the leg-to-body ratio, which is quite interesting. Often some birds, I know some of the plovers, their legs when they're born are actually adult size, and they actually grow. They're like a puppy, basically, well, more extreme than a puppy. They grow into their legs fundamentally. So it looks pretty bizarre with these massive legs on this little tiny ball of fluff. But there's been in some cases you'll get, so the adult birds will leave the chicks before they fledge, fly back to wherever their summer grounds are, and the chicks will. There's a lot of amazing things about migration and how they do and what they do, but the fact that these birds, particularly with birds that are sight faithful, because we lived around in Brisbane, around Moreton Bay, and so you get the same birds returning to those areas of Moreton Bay, and so the adults will arrive back, and the young birds on their own find their way back to those same areas. Now look, science has not really been able to work out how the hell that happens, but it's as though they have an inbuilt GPS in their DNA. There's this innate understanding of where they need to go, which is quite crazy. But all these birds use the EAFF, which is the East Asian Australian flyway, and so all these the plovers and these sandpipers use those routes, varying routes. But as you probably know, there's a few strategies these birds use. They can see polarization of the sun, which will indicate direction. They can sense magnetic fields in their heads, so that also enables them to keep that northerly orientation. They can read land map forms in terms of for following coastlines, and at night time they can actually read star charts, star patterns. So they've got all these different strategies depending on whether and how they do it. They certainly take advantage of prevailing winds. I mean, the birds will wait until they have a tailwind before they head off, because it's a pretty strenuous sort of a flight, an incredible sort of physical feat. So they really need to take advantage of everything they can. And that being the case, the physiological things that they do, they double their body weight often with fat. Their heart and their pectoral muscles enlarge to enable them to, enable them to actually get through that physical activity. And the pectoral muscle is obviously critical when certain organs are not needed, like on long leg flights. For instance, the bar-tailed godwit, which flies all the way back from Alaska non-stop in 11 days, certain organs will atrophy and they'll shrink. So there's no energy needed to keep those organs flowing, and they will obviously pretty quickly go back to normal when they're feeding again. So there's some amazing strategies as to how they do these things, and I think science knows a little bit about it, but I think there's still so many mysteries about how the hell they go about those things. Okay, so now we'll move on to some of the resident birds, and now this one falls in the middle ground. We've got the double-banded plover. It is migratory, but it's a New Zealand species. So we'll count that as we do, we tend to count everything from New Zealand that's good for it as one of ours. And so this guy migrates from New Zealand and winters here. So it's here through our winter and breeds back in New Zealand. So we get them around the mouth of the Lebanon Creek often. This is in breeding plumage, so it's quite bright and they're banding, but it's a lot more muted. Very similar to our local in size and form is our red-capped plovers. I'm sure you guys have seen these little fellas scuttling across the sand. This is a male, which is a lot brighter than the female. So the chestnut on the head and the black markings are quite much more dominant. Now, most of the plovers do that when they are nesting, because these all nest locally, except for the double-banded. They will do that broken wing display thing. So if you ever approach the nest or chicks, they'll scuttle on the ground pretending they have a broken wing to try and distract you and drag you away from the chicks and eggs. So the red cap, they're pretty common around here, but they're real problems in terms of nesting successes because of cats, dogs, disturbance by humans, and all those sort of issues. And that's what I meant to say in relation to the migratory waders. The biggest problems with those guys is the development along the coast, along the flyways, is that there's been so much development, in the South China Sea, where some of their feeding points on their migrations, there's been up to, like the Chinese coast is 80% developed now, which means it's hard surface, which means all the mud flats are no longer available. So the areas that they can feed are shrinking, which means they've got less options available to them. While they're still making those migrations, there's a real danger that if something fails, they don't have any fallbacks. There was a case, I can't remember how many years back, where they actually, a particular area in the South China Sea, some mud flats, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. There was it was a really severe winter, and there was no clams which certain birds like the red knots feed on. There was virtually no food supply there. They raised some money and they dumped 100,000 tonnes of clams, airdropped, but air and boat dropped on the mudflats. Now, I don't know what the hell that cost and the logistics, but that's not really a long-term solution. But these are the sort of things, along with development and shrinking of potential feeding sites, and climate change, of course, affecting those windows, those breeding windows are getting narrower or changing, and birds they cannot change quickly enough to accommodate those things. Anyway, back to the residents. So red-capped plover, beautiful little guys, and a very handsome one of the red-knee dotterel, which is one of my favourite little local dotterels. Very handsome little birds. You can usually get reasonably close to those guys, unlike the black-fronted, which is common-ish around the area, around the Laverton Creek, near the ford, around the Altona Foreshore Reserve. But these guys, a lot harder to approach, and often the only first time you see them is because they are quite well camouflaged despite their bold markings, and they'll take off from under your feet in this really zigzaggy flight, and you usually hear quite a distinct little chip 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 call as they take off. But they're all quite beautifully marked and quite boldly marked. But despite that, they can be quite hard to see at times. Okay, so moving on to other waders and shorebirds. So these guys were probably familiar with all these, but they're quite regular visitors around these areas, and all quite dramatic. I find some of these birds the most elegant of our water birds and wetland birds. Anyway, the pied oystercatcher, quite a distinct bold bird, large, and becoming more and more common around. When I was quite young, you really never saw them much along the beach, but now they're quite a common presence along the Altona foreshore, particularly towards the end of the beach near the mouth of the Laverton Creek, where it feeds out into the bay there. So, the sooties, we do get sooties here and there, but the sooty oystercatcher is the all-black oystercatcher, which prefers rocky areas. So they won't be found on sandy substrates. You'll find them on rocky sort of outcrops and things like that. So they have been found in the area. So I know that they have been seen around the Altona beach area where all those rocks are. And top right here, the black-winged stilt. Well, we all know these guys, usually circling, yapping like a demented fox terrier, when they get disturbed by dogs or whatever. But they're very elegant birds, beautiful to see. And as the name implies, they have very long legs, and I'm pretty sure it's the longest leg to body ratio of any bird in the world, actually. But beautiful just to watch them feeding and walking gently through the shallows and probing in the mud. Now, so I'll go to the bottom right here. So this is the Hobson Bay Wetlands Centre's emblem, or is on the logo, the red-necked avocet. Beautiful, elegant birds. We often get them in large numbers around Altona, in certain spots, particularly at certain times around the Laverton Creek mouth again, in the hundreds. And on the left here, we have the banded stilts. Now, while I haven't seen necessarily in the creek in large numbers, this shot was taken it's not a great shot, but I wanted to show you the sort of numbers you get. This was taken in Cheetham Cheetham Wetlands, which is abutting where our wetland centre will be. So Cheetham's is about a 40-hectare site northwest of the Laverton Creek there, heading along the coast towards Point Cook. And it's closed off to the public, but they do have outings there a couple of times a year. So if you get the opportunity to get out there, do. It's great to have it there and to have it protected. It's just a wonderful habitat to have been maintained because the numbers of birds that use it are fantastic, and to have them with a lack of disturbance, well, relatively, it's great. So this is just a full mob of banded stilts, but often in amongst large groups of avocets. Keep your eye out for a bird without a pale white head, because often there'll be the odd one in amongst the avocets, and obviously there's no markings on the head, and that's always a giveaway that it isn't the black-winged stilt or an avocet. Okay, so then getting to what I call the chooky birds. they're the gallinules and the rails. Yeah, some of them are quite obvious and prominent and common, and others are, while common, aren't that easy to see because they're quite skulky in their habits. So purple swampland, which I think is quite a wonderfully dramatic, quite prehistoric sort of bird. We've all seen them grazing on the banks of the creeks around the area, or any near any wetlands. They tend to like grazing on grass. Beautiful colours, very primitive sort of look with that cast bill. And Eurasian coots, which are found all around the area in large numbers. Places like Cherry Lake have big numbers, and you guys have possibly seen chicks recently. Most of these guys are all having chicks in the area at the moment, but the Eurasian coot chicks are pretty crazy little guys. A lot of these birds have really quite weird markings on their heads. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. Probably gives you gives the parent a target to aim the food for, but it seems to be overly ornate for my money. But anyway, they're pretty crazy little things, and I really like them. Black-tailed native hens, not particularly common, but I have seen them certainly around the area in the past. They often will just turn up overnight in large numbers, sort of migratory within Australia, and will just sort of lob overnight and then disappear overnight as well. So quite mysterious as to why they come and go like that, but I'm assuming it's food-based. Dusky moorhens, again, quite a common bird, but not that common in our region, but beautifully marked, sleek, velvet-looking plumage with a wonderfully coloured bill. Okay, now these are the more skulky, secretive little guys. The buff-banded rail. Good spots for seeing these guys is, well, anywhere there's dense vegetation on the edge of the waterways. Laverton Creek at low tide, particularly. Laverton Creek is lined by mangroves, and Koroit Creek is along the Koroit Creek. So at high tide, these guys will be pushed up into the vegetation. At low tide, there'll be that area of bank between the bottom of the vegetation and the waterline. So they'll be feeding. They'll come out and feed on the mud, and you'll get a chance of seeing them. And that's the same case with the crakes. So the spotless crake, top right, and the Australian spotted crake. Now I've seen spotless crakes, Australian spotted crake, and buff banded rail in the areas. And now I know Baillian's crakes are in the area, but I haven't seen one, or not specifically in these areas. And they're very similar to a spotted crake, but just more russet upper parts, and not as spotty throughout and stripy as the spotted crake. But either way, a good way of seeing these guys, low tide with some exposed mud near some heavy vegetation. Just sit down quietly and just be patient, and you might be rewarded with these guys just popping out for a feed. And while they are secretive and quite skittish, if you just sit there quietly, they'll ultimately ignore you, which is often a good way to bird. You get accepted as part of the landscape. Okay, so the grebes that inhabit the area. I did recently see some great crested grebes at the Jawbone Wetlands, or the Jawbone Reserve. They're quite spectacular birds in breeding plumage. That amazing sort of head colouring. But the most common two guys we see around are, so we've got the hoary-headed. So if it's saline and salty, it's mostly this. On the left-hand side, we have Australian grebe, which is in breeding plumage. So it's quite easy to pick from the hoary-headed, and the hoary-headed has this really rough feathering on its head area. But in winter plumage, they're both quite similar. The Australian grebe is a lot more brownish in tinge, whereas the hoary-headed is a lot grayer. But in dull light, again, it's pretty hard to pick. But if it's saline and salty, it won't be an Australian grebe. But if it's freshwater, it doesn't mean it won't be hoary-headed, but it's more likely to be an Australian grebe. But definitely if it's saline, it usually knocks out it being an Australian grebe. So these guys are quite common around Truganina Swamp, Cherry Lake, Laverton Creek, most of the creeks. and obviously they'll vary depending on when it changes from salt, brackish to fresh. The species will intermix and then separate often. Okay, sorry. Yep. Okay. All right. Now we don't have, well, while we do have a lot of common ducks. So these are the duck species, waterfowl. There's not a lot of species, but with the interesting ones pop up now and then. Most common, and again, one of the few ducks out of these types of ducks that will be in salt water. The most common duck around here is the chestnut teal in salt water, and so we have the male in breeding plumage, which is quite distinctive in terms of its colouring and markings, whereas the female chestnut teal is quite dull and grey. And there is another duck, quite common duck about the same size, the grey teal, and they will be virtually pretty hard to pick apart. But again, if these guys are in salt water, then it's basically chestnut teal. The Pacific black duck, well, we all know these guys. They're a large duck, pretty common, beautiful markings, lovely eye stripe, and nothing else really has that sort of eye striping. So you can usually, that's a diagnostic thing that'll pick that one out. Relatively common, we have the wide-eyed duck or the hardhead. Quite distinct. These are all dabbling ducks. So ducks that feed by upending. So they're bum in the air, head down, eating vegetation. So the wide-eyed duck, a very, very even chocolate brown, beautiful chocolate brown colour though, and the eye just pops out. Again, from a distance, you're not going to pick it, but with a set of binoculars, there's no mistaking that for anything. Now, a couple of more interesting ducks of the area. We get two of the stiff-tailed ducks. The blue-billed. Now, this is the male, so it's very dominant red. This is in breeding plumage, of course. So during their non-breeding, they're both a lot duller. But these are pretty crazy guys. And the blue-billed duck and the musk duck, being stiff-tailed ducks, they sit very low. They're diving ducks, so they don't feed. They don't do the bum up, head down feeding. They actually dive. They physically dive under the water. So they sit quite low in the water. So at a distance, the profile is of something quite low. So it's you'll know it's not a dabbling duck pretty much just by the way it sits in the water. So blue-billed duck in a breeding plumage, beautiful blue bill, amazing sort of reddish brown plumage. The musk duck, they're quite crazy guys. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the display. So the male has this lobed thing under its bill, which puffs with air, and it sort of has this amazing tail slapping display, which it hits. So it puffs it up and engorges that and displays, and the tail comes up and down, hits the water with a large splashing sound, and hopefully that impresses the girls. But yeah, that's quite impressive to see. But they're a weird looking duck. They're quite, again, I think they're quite primitive in the way they look. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just the impression I get. Okay, bottom left we have the shoveler. Now we do get them relatively regularly, not in large numbers, but I've seen them in reasonable numbers on the Laverton Creek, near the mouth of Laverton Creek again. So we've got the male and female there. From a distance, really, that crescent behind the bill shape is a giveaway. In profile, the bill just looks bigger than most ducks. So that'll be a diagnostic thing for you. And one of my favourite little ducks here on the right-hand side, I have seen large numbers. These are quite nomadic ducks. They'll as a lot of the Australian ducks, they'll go where the food is and they'll go where the water is to breed. So depending on rainfall in different parts of Australia, they will be found anywhere in Australia. So the pink-eared duck is quite a small duck, but again the bill is a bit of a giveaway. So the profile of this bird is usually the first thing that will indicate what it is, size and the bill shape. But they're very pretty little guys, also called the zebra duck because of those striped markings. They're pretty spectacular. I love drawing them. All the illustrations, by the way, are mine in these. I thought I'd throw a few in there, so they're not all photographs. So, but to draw, I just love that sort of banding and patterning. And then the cream on the cake is the little pink bit behind the ear. which is always quite hard to see in the field, I'll have to admit. Okay, so we're moving on to the large wading birds. Now, look, you're probably familiar with most of these, but I'll just give a little bit on some of them, may be of interest and help you ID some of them. Now, the white-faced heron, we all know this guy. Often, can get quite close to them, but they're quite beautiful birds, and in breeding plumage, they have those plumes on the wings, which just a little bit longer and more ornate. And but watching them fishing in the shallows is always a bit of a pleasure, no matter how often you see them. And that when they take off, there's that really harsh guttural call, which is synonymous with the wetland to me. Now with the egrets, there are a lot more species, but I haven't included them. We have a little egret, which is little, and the great egret, which is quite large. Now there are a couple of in between. There's an intermediate egret, which we may get here at odd times, but I haven't seen one for many, many years, so I won't confuse the issue. But from a distance, if you see a white egret, size is not all. I mean, the great egret is so large, it's generally unmistakable with anything else. But from a distance, an egret sometimes can look like just an egret. But if you look at the feeding, behaviour, that is absolutely a diagnostic thing. The little egret tends to run around, wings outstretched, quite manic in the way. So it actually often will shed its fish and prey ahead of itself, and then chase after it. So it's a little bit more of a chase and a push it forward. So it's more proactive hunting, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas the great egret is more of a patient waiting type. So it'll be very still. You'll just see it cock its head, wait, and then in the split second thrust of the neck, and hopefully comes up with something. So their feeding behaviours are very, very different. Interesting, very similar birds. I guess it might have something to do with the size and the depth it's able to drive its beak. As to how the intermediate hunts, I can't remember because I haven't seen one in hunting for a long time. So I'll leave it up to you if you see one. Now the Nanking night heron, that generally needs vegetation near wetlands to roost and because as the name indicates, it comes out at night to feed. It comes out dusk. Best time to see them is early morning and just on dusk when they come out to feed. So generally during the day, they will be roosting in vegetation. So I know there's a couple around certain areas, like around the pines near the Altona Coastal Reserve, the pines there, and some in more built-up areas like the Botanic Gardens in Williamstown. But I have to admit, I haven't seen them in any of the open places because they just need that. There may be some in the Explosives Reserve in Altona. I'm not sure. I'll have to speak to the rangers about that. But don't quite know on that front. Okay, so some of the coastal seabirds. Is interesting about what's considered a seabird. Now these guys are considered seabirds, even though they hang around on the coast completely. Because I found out only recently that all the gulls are not considered seabirds. They're considered shorebirds because they spend, even though you might find them 10 kilometres out to sea, sometimes they generally are found around the shore. But cormorants, which are always around the coast, are considered seabirds. So go figure. So anyway, there's a good trick. So the four most common species. There's one I've left out, which is the black-faced, but we've got two. We've got two small and two large. So we've got little black and the great, and we have the little pied and the pied. Now I'll go a really clever trick for identifying. If it's little and it's black, it's a little black, and if it's little and it's pied, it's a little pied. So again, size is the issue, but it's initially you think, oh, cormorants, I find them confusing, but the smaller little black guys, if you don't see them side by side, the little black has no white on it whatsoever, and the grey cormorant has that white and a yellow bare skin around the beak. And again, size is the issue with these guys, but if you look at the shape, even if from a distance, and you think, well, I can't really work out the size, if you look at the head form of the, it's got a yellow bill, which is more prominent during breeding season, but the head shape itself is very, very different. But again, it's pretty much a size thing. So, but there is a black-faced, I think, which has been seen around the Sandy Point this year. I didn't see it, but it's pretty much like the pied, but without the yellow. Imagine the black coming forward to the bill and no yellow mark, no bare yellow skin around it, just on top of between the eye and the bill. But I haven't seen it. Okay, so that's actually it for the shorebirds themselves. We can actually open to some questions on birds generally, because I'll be moving on to the art and inspiration after this. If there's any questions, I'll open it to some questions if people want to ask anything about specific birds. Now, I have to apologise to some of the competent birders, because I was trying to cover a few bases in terms of the information. So I hope there was something in there for most of you.
Hi, Rob. I'll just add that Rebecca just wrote in our chat that there's dusky moorhen chicks at the lakes at Edgewater now.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, they're all quite crazy. Actually, I forgot to point out on the grebe image, the Australian grebe, there was a chick sitting on its back. I don't know if anybody noticed that. No? Well, they're quite crazily marked too. They got stripes. Really wild horizontal stripes from the beak to the bum, basically. And all the three grebe species have the same sort of chicks. They don't have those wild things on their head, but they do have these really bold, amazing markings. But they often, the Australian grebes will often breed around on Newport Lakes, and you get a good look at them when their chicks have hatched.
Whereabouts do you access Jawbone Reserve from? Actually,
good point. You remind me. I'm gonna bring up I'll bring up a map so we can look at the sites. But look, I think that whole stretch. Actually, I should get the map up, shouldn't I? I'll get the map up. But anywhere between the end of Maddox Road, you've got there's the bird hide there. So at the mouth of the Croy Creek. But the Jawbone area, I often like to go in on the boardwalk. And work my way from the boardwalk going west and hug the lagoons, going west from there, and just keep following the wetlands along there, because you do cover a lot of different habitats that way. So what I'll do is I will get I'll get the map up. You want to do that? I'll get that up now, eh? Now, look, again, I apologise if you're quite familiar with these areas, but I'll work through what the most obvious areas that are worth visiting. So, beginning right down here, we've got the Skeleton Creek. Now, this is Cheetham Wetlands, which is that's the area that's closed off to the public. And
Rob, can everyone see the map?
No, I can't see it, Rob.
Screen sharing. How about screen sharing would be good?
Yeah, screen sharing, please.
That would be very good. Okay, sorry guys. Screen share.
That's it.
Okay, I'll get it full screen. Sorry guys. Okay, so there we go. So we're down here, Skeleton Creek. And this area here is the Cheetham Wetlands. Now that's the area I mentioned, about 40 hectares closed up to the public. If you ever get the opportunity to go there, please do. It's fabulous and it's wonderful, and get the opportunity to go in somewhere where there's no, where disturbance is low is pretty special. And that is a great high tide roost and feeding spot for so many of the migratory waders, and breeding site for a lot of the plovers and dotterels.
I have a question, Rob.
Yep.
Can you add Laverton Creek? The circle there encompasses quite a bit promontory, quite south of the bridge.
Yep.
Can you get down that far?
You mean Laverton Creek?
Yes.
I've only. Well, you mean sort of heading towards Truganina Swamp? That's sort of north, isn't it? That's north.
Yes. So if you walk over the bridge from.
Oh yeah, you can get all the way to. In actual fact, that's one of the hot spots. If you cross the bridge
Yep. Yes.
and walk on the opposite bank and keep just hugging the bank until you get all the way to the point, that inlet lagoon here.
Yep.
Is a great spot at the lower tides.
So you're allowed down that far.
Oh yes, you can get right all the way to the point. Yep. There's no access closed off. There is sort of a gate. There is a gate that a vehicle gate, which I have once. It was shut off for some reason. I can't remember what it was, but generally no. You've got full access to that area. And in actual fact, I would recommend that's a great spot to go because you get less people disturbing the birds as you do on the other side of the creek. This is the area where the kite flyers are here and lots of dogs, which can be good because it puts the birds up and it moves them around, so you get to see them flying. But it's not so great for the birds because they're expending energy that they shouldn't be wasting on evading dogs and people.
We went the other weekend and there were guys flying their drones for 2 hours and scared all our birds.
Yes. Well, I have to admit, there was a certain amount of schadenfreude. There was a guy in one of those big self-propelled things with a motor on it, one of those flying things. I don't know what they're called, but a big motor on the back of it. He's in the opposite end of Laverton Creek. He's lifted up. He's lifted up, and it made a heck of a racket. And he put in he quit. The engine quit on him. And he put it in the middle of the mud here, and he had to drag this thing out. So anyway, but the drone thing, I'm not sure what the regulations are with that, but luckily enough, we're lucky that Hobsons Bay Council now has jurisdiction over this point because there's been no man's land in the past. Compliance, while we had compliance laws, getting someone out there, really, there's no. I've never seen when it was Parks Victoria. I've never seen a PV individual out there ever. So personally, we've all probably had discussions with people and dogs and got abused and told off for having the audacity to suggest that they shouldn't let their dog run where it's not supposed to be running. But anyway, that is one of our biggest issues in terms of disturbance to birds is people and dogs off lead because people often just throw balls into that area when the birds are trying to feed, and it's that thing. People think it's this wonderful thing, communing with nature, dogs, birds in the air. It's all wonderful, but But look, this is our job in terms of it. You've got people who don't know and will respond to the information. You've got other people who, at the other end, just don't care. It doesn't matter what you tell them; they just think bugger off. It's my right to do whatever I want, wherever I want. But it's that middle, and there's people who know the story and will never do it. So it's that middle ground that we have to work on to try and convert, educate, inform, and hopefully, our numbers will be bigger and they'll be frowned upon because people will know. But luckily, they've got the new, as we know, we've got the new dog walk area up here. Around here, so it's fenced off, so people cannot now say, "Oh, I didn't know." I mean, there's this massive fenced area. This is where you walk your dogs. There's a signs all the way around the perimeter. So at least they don't have that as an excuse, not knowing anymore. But it was the height of optimism to have a physical demarcation, a dog lead off area, and then all of a sudden the dogs can't go any further. I mean, the dogs see the water, and in they go. So anyway, so that's an improvement. But the Challa Street, I think, is one of the hot spots, a little bit of an unknown hotspot. You go to the end of Maddox Road, all the way to where the little fishing villages are, where the fishing village is there. The creek there, it's a wonderful spot. Great, because it's lined with mangroves. The Croy Creek there is lined with mangroves. If you come the opposite side and just sit there quietly, at low tide, you get all sorts of things turning up on the mud. And towards the mouth, so at the end of Maddox Road where there's a bird hide, I tend to step to the left of the bird hide because the bird hide's a nuisance. But at low tide there's lots of coming and going waders and bits and pieces, and it's a bit of a thoroughfare. Often, I saw a female goshawk, which is pretty big, cruise through there. So putting up the waders as it cruised through and landed on there's a little fence post on the opposite side, just sat there looking at me with these really angry eyes. Yeah, beautiful things. So that's a great spot, depending on the tides again, of course. And we've got the Jawbone area, which I think is, as you said, Rebecca, I reckon if you come in from, what is it, Cummins, there's a car park, Cummins Street, which is the closest little car park if you want to not walk that far to the actual boardwalk. But the boardwalk's a great way of getting you into that sensitive vegetation without doing any damage. And at the moment, it's running pretty hot because there's a lot of people coming and going because everybody's out for a walk. But generally speaking, you can spend some time there. You've got the ocean section or the bay area, which can have different waders. There's a rocky outcrop at high tide. You'll get like hundreds and hundreds of redneck stints and some sharp-tailed sandpipers roosting on the rocks. Not too far away, but you'll get sharpies and redneck stints feeding close to you as the tide pushes in. That's always a good time. And on the right-hand side, you've got the sheltered little ponds. And at high tide, you'll often get sharp-tailed sandpipers and redneck stints sheltering in there. So that's a good spot. And another area a little bit further northish. So yeah, we've got the Sandy Point Reserve, which that's the revegetated area on the point, which is quite a wonderful little oasis. I mean, you're sort of right in amongst sports fields and things, and you go into this little area, and the vegetation is now quite high and mature, and so all you see is the chimney stack from the power station, and you don't see any houses. And on a good day, and if it's quiet, you can be like in the middle of the bush. It's really, really nice. And you'll get waders along this little sandy spit. You'll get, there'll be redneck stints, red-capped plovers. I saw a marsh sandpiper, which is the first marsh sandpiper I'd seen in the area for years. Yeah, just down there on its own. So anything can turn up, but it's a lovely little spot. There's a few bush birds and a couple of nice spots just to sit and listen and wait. So that's sort of all the main hot spots there. But look, you've got, of course, forgot Truganina Swamp. Okay, that's a place that I hadn't really spent much time at, even though I'd always see it and go past it. And in the past, the creek here, the Lebanon Creek, it's been sort of opened up. There used to be a lot of many years ago. There was a lot of vegetation in the edges, but it was, so you get lots of things like red-knee dodderels in amongst it. But now all you really get is the big stuff. And at the right when there's a food around, you get avocets, a lot of avocets along here. Stilt's always there. Egrets feeding, and quite often there's an outfall where the sports fit. What is it, the basketball stadium? I think there's a little outfall there. And one day I went there, and I don't know what was going on, but there obviously was nutrients coming out of the outfall. And actually, I had a friend who is a friend of Robert Ashdown, who's with us today, who he was a ranger, an ex-ranger, and we were just there, and there must have been, because of the nutrients, there was a lot of fish feeding at this little particular spot, and it went crazy. We had both species of egrets going. We had cormorants diving. We had crested terns. We had whiskered terns. There was birds, and there was action everywhere. The water was boiling with activity, and it was just crazy. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what happened that day, but obviously it was conducive to the fish being there, which dragged the birds along, and that was great. But this stretch can be great depending on what the food is at the time. You can get avocets in their absolute hundreds. But if you work your way up along this stretch of creek, then you've got this area which you can access from other areas. Truganina Swamp, it's a series of ponds and lots of reed beds and sedge. So you get lots of little brown birds, little golden-headed testiculars, all those little secretive things that call. And if you make some funny noises, often they'll jump to the top of the grasses and give you a look at them. Full of frogs, lots of amphibians, great for birds of prey because things like swamp harriers love it because they're hunting around. Peregrines, little falcons, or hobbies, Australian hobbies. But it's beautiful, great to do a lap of it because you get so many different habitats, great grasslands, and that's Yeah, that's under Melbourne Water jurisdiction, and it's been maintained really well. There's a lot of effort going into putting in plantings and stuff like that. Things like chaffy sedge, which is the skipper butterfly plant, which they're associated with. So I can't say I've seen the sedge, but I've seen the chaffy sedge, but I've never seen the skipper butterfly, unfortunately. But that's a great walk. But there's a couple of ponds which you can just stand there, and depending on the tides, again, you'll get lots of waders coming in to roost, egrets, ibis, various things like that. So I think, and Cherry Lake. Cherry Lake's interesting. It's a bit of a biological desert in a way, but the edges are, like anything, the edges are always the most interesting because they've got the variety of habitats. So lots of reed beds. This back end has some varied, and depending on rain, of course, you'll get lots of ephemeral wetlands turn up, and you can get all sorts of birds turning up. So yeah, that's that area covered. So I'll stop sharing that. Any questions about the sites? No?
How often is Cheetham Wetlands open, Rob? How often does that happen?
The centre, you mean?
I guess so.
Well, Marilyn could talk to that, but yeah, we won't be able to until next year. So the Explosives Reserve, the Underkeepers Quarters, which is our home. Marilyn, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I spoke to the rangers yesterday. It doesn't look like we'll be able to get back into it until after Christmas, which is a shame. But what we do there is we meet there we work there every Thursday. We share the building because it's a temporary building for us. We share it with the Truganina Explosives Reserve Preservation Society, and the men's shed are also there renovating the actual Underkeepers Quarters where we spend time. We used to be there every Thursday, and then we would have workshops at the weekend and 2 major open days during the year. Our last open day was in February, and we're hoping by February next year, because it's World Wetlands Day, we'll be back almost to where we want to be with an open day then. Meanwhile, we can't really go back. What we are doing is, as some of you will know, is we're working now very closely with Council on getting a purpose-built building built, and that will be on the other side of Laverton Creek from the Truganina Explosives Reserve, much closer to the Ramsar bird wetlands.
Yeah, looking forward to that, hey?
Yeah, look, it's looking quite good at the moment. We're on the North and West Melbourne City deal as a project. It's a matter of getting our project shovel ready, which is what Council are helping us do now over the next year. While I'm here, yeah, the street that you mentioned, it's isn't it Mullins Court?
Mullins. Oh, sorry.
Mullins Court.
Sorry, Mullins. Yes, correct. Sorry.
Mullins Court.
Got my C's and M's confused. Okay. All right. Well, I'll move on. We'll move on to the art. Hey.
Yeah, that'd be great, Rob.
Okay. Well, I have been. Where are we? How did I do it? Yeah. While I've been interested in natural history, all my life, I have to admit I really haven't painted a lot over the years, but I recently returned to it. So I was a member of the Wildlife Artists Society many years ago. Used to exhibit with them, but look, my output was really not particularly great. I went up north to Queensland for a while to attempt to have a bit more of a crack at painting full time, but survival and keeping the family fed got in the way of being a life as an artist. So I just needed a wealthy wealthy benefactor or marry a rich woman or something, but it never quite happened. So look, my forays into wildlife art were sporadic and quite limited. But last year, anyway, I'll talk about my more recent work later as we get into it. But there's been lots of influences, and it's not just. I've only chosen a couple, and they are dedicated wildlife artists. But my inspiration comes from very wide and far afield, as I was discussing earlier. People like Alexander Coldor, these his wire sculptures have inspired me in the way, and contemporary art, pop art, contemporary art, even street. These days it's probably even just as likely to be street art as much as anything else. But anyway, so this is Raymond Harris Ching. Now, I don't know if anybody's heard of this guy. Look, he's probably gone under the radar in many ways, but he's the most incredible draftsman. If you have a look at the drawing of this Kiwi on the right here, the guy could draw the pants off just about anyone I know. In terms of that, there's a sense of looseness. Even in his paintings, he did paint very tightly and very realistically, but I always liked his studies better than his finished pieces because I love that looseness. But there's an accuracy and an understanding and a draftsmanship which is just exceptional. If you look at the work here, his ability to see and capture things. So there's life without. There was a trend towards photorealism for a long time in wildlife art. The problem with wildlife art is that because it's linked to natural history and natural history roots, it is seen as a lesser art form because it wasn't really seen as art. So in terms of contemporary art or the art scene, the art cognoscenti would poo-poo it because and look, a lot of wildlife artists are their own worst enemy. We do kookaburras on a rusty mailbox and birds on stick. I jokingly refer to it as birds on sticks. So and while look, to each their own, and it's fine. But my thing about wildlife art is it's got good wildlife art is just good art. It just happens to be the subject matter is wildlife or of nature. So that's just where I come from. That, but Raymond Ching, he's quite an eccentric character. He's getting on now. He's from New Zealand originally, lived in the UK, worked in an old castle with primitive conditions. Look the guy up because he's a brilliant draftsman. He actually does a lot of portrait work. He paints portraits beautifully, and I think he's just a great. Unlike the two next artists I will show you, he was just I'm not sure how much of a naturalist or whether he loved birds, but he loved just painting things, and birds caught his attention. When you see his figure work, it's painted just as beautifully. And so I think he could turn his hand to anything. It just depends on what his mood, what mood took him. But he, for decades, he painted birds, and in a very interesting, odd way. Sometimes he very, again, quite Renaissance, or almost in a Renaissance feel. If you look at here's the man here, and this is typical of his more later work, which is most of it's from museum stuffed birds, from taxidermy birds. But there was a whimsy and there was something going on more than just brilliant rendering of birds. But yeah, check out his work because it's mind blowing. But look, he was very collectible. I think he was big in the UK when he lived in London. But he goes under the radar. Most people probably don't know much about it. Well, if anything at all. But for my money, as a draftsman, as a painter of feathers, not that that's what it should be about, but his ability to render birds is probably unsurpassed in the past or ever since. But I do like...
Sorry. I have a question for you, Rob, from Kerry. Are these oils or watercolours?
This is oils. And he was quite an eccentric character. There was a well-known artist, really popular, probably America's greatest wildlife artist, for whatever that means, Robert Bateman. Now, he's a household name in America and very collectible, and he used to do big, dynamic, epic pieces of African things like African animals, elephants and lions and things like that, which which did feed through to the wildlife art set. Everybody was painting the big animals, the sort of the impressive megafauna, even though they'd never seen this stuff in their lives. It never really appealed to me because I'd rather paint. Well, I think they're amazing animals and fantastic. It just felt like I was following trends. But anyway, Robert Bateman visited Rob Mancini in his studio. And Rob Mancini was a smoker, a heavy smoker, and he was in a room. Now, the two things don't go with oil painting are dust and dirt. But anyway, it was a heavy smoker, and his studio apparently was just littered with every cigarette butt he'd ever had in there was just thrown on the ground. And there was a curved wall of cigarette butts. So there was all this dust. It was dark. You had really primitive lighting, some little dodgy bulb on hanging from a cord. And Robert Bateman said, "My God, how can you work like this? This is ridiculous." So he went back to the States, bought this amazing lighting setup that he used, and sent it off to Rob Mancini, thinking he'll love it. Anyway, he visited him again like 5 years later or something, and there was the lighting system in the corner, unpacked, still in the box, left unwrapped. So, needless to say, he didn't need better lighting because his work. I don't think he cared. He just wanted to paint, and it worked for him.
Rob, I've just looked him up, and he's heavily tattooed too, so he's a colourful bird himself.
And look, it doesn't surprise me. I didn't know that about it, but very interesting. Now we're going backwards a little bit here. This is and this leads into the person after this person, but and I discovered this person probably through the artist who will follow. But there's a contemporary artist called Lars Johnson, who's a Swedish artist, and Bruno Liljefors is a Swedish artist who I admire immensely. And I was lucky to travel to Sweden many years ago and visit one of the galleries which has a very extensive collection of the Liljefors' work. Now, Liljefors is from that, so he was in the early 1800s, comes from that family of, he was a hunter, and the reason he knew so much about animals and birds and depicted them so well is he knew them inside out. He would, and I think probably in later life, he didn't do a lot of hunting, but did a lot of painting. But I think he understood the subject matter so well. But additional to that, I think he was painting when this ties back to that thing about what is real art and what does wildlife art deserve to be called art. He was painting when the French Impressionists were painting, and a lot of his work is super loose and very impressionistic. And in my opinion, he was equal in his art was equal to any of the great Impressionist painters. It just happened to be that he painted wildlife and was probably not very well recognised outside of Sweden. But his work is quite magnificent. And I love this piece, and I threw it in because it's so Japanese influenced. There was that influence go through all the design throughout Europe, and this is just so Japanese to me. It's beautiful, but it is sublime. It's a goshawk chasing a black grouse, and the composition, everything about it is pretty spectacular in my opinion. Now this piece, this is one of them. I've got a photo of me standing in front of this in the I can't remember the gallery, but it was a wealthy Swedish chap who set up a museum basically built around Liljefors' work. Now this painting is probably 3 meters wide. It is so powerful and so dramatic. It's one of the most moving. There's a lot going on. I think probably it's the eagle. Something about the vulnerability of the hare and the power of the eagle. I don't know. There's a lot you can read a lot into it. But it just in pure painting terms, it was as powerful a painting as I've ever seen. Equivalent to maybe Picasso's Guernica or something. I don't know. But it's just a beautiful bit of painting. But if you look at the way it's painted, it's so loose and free. Yet, from someone who's got a naturalist eye, it's so real. And that's what was happening later in wildlife art. Everybody was chasing photorealism. But I mean, work that impresses me is if you can capture the essence and drag somebody to that place and experience with that bird, make them believe that they're there or feel as though they're there. And if you can achieve that with in a loose way, then in my opinion, that's successful from my point of view. That's the way I look at it. But if you paint something in so much detail, every feather, every little speck, there's a term, painting something to death. And I can appreciate that, because you can get less life in something that's got more work in it and more heavily worked than something that's a bit more freer and loose.
What type of eagle is that, Rob?
That's a golden eagle. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, this is again going backwards. So this is Lars Johnson's work, who was the reason I discovered Bruno Liljefors's work. Now, Lars Johnson is a Swedish artist. Again, strong naturalist background. He knows his birds incredibly. He's actually, and this is, so he's a scientist, he's an environmentalist, and he's also a very talented painter. But a lot of his work, he too does a lot of very detailed work, but there's always a level of looseness and spontaneity about the work. Now, this is quite a loose piece. He has much more finished work, but I just love this in terms of the way it captures the light. It captures the essence of the bird, and you know exactly what it is, and it's scientifically accurate in terms of where things are, but it's not you thinking, oh, is that a photograph, or is that a painting? It's quite clearly a painting, but it's a motive. Part of the artist has been thrown into this, and you can feel it. But he just happens to be, this is interesting, he happens to be, this was a while back, but he's considered to be Sweden's best artist, whatever that means. So in any genre, any style, he was considered Sweden's best artist. So that is quite interesting. I think Europe generally has a healthier attitude to how the crossovers of wildlife and art. Yeah, his work is very instrumental in where I sort of went with my traditional work. So this is an oil. That last one's a watercolor, of course, and this is an oil. His ability to capture light and feeling was quite impressive. Here's a gyrfalcon, the magnificent raptor of the tundra, which I think I saw, but I can't when we're up there. But it was such a fleeting glimpse. I couldn't confirm it. Oh, sorry. Where am I? Now here's the man himself. I did get to meet the man. He lives on an island, Gotland, in southern Sweden. It's not far off the mainland, and it's subject to these warm. It's warm for Sweden, is what I'm trying to say. And so he would get lots of beautiful. He's got these little estuaries which were constantly shifting sands, and it would attract lots of migratory waders. So the stuff that would pass through. Sorry about that, guys. Lots of stuff would pass through, and I've got a beautiful book of his, which it's about one spit of sand, which is ephemeral, a bit like the mouth of our Lebanon Creek. It's always changing. It's dynamic. Anyway, he just logged and documented the birds that came and went on this one spit of sand over a summer, and it's poetic and it's just beautiful. But what I loved, well, he was very generous. So we went there with our kids, and both of them were very taken with the man. He's about 6'4". His hand, I'm not a big guy, and when I shook his hand, he enveloped half my arm basically. He's a giant of a guy. But when you look at this, I love this. This is a pintail duck on the left-hand side. The incredible subtlety and the fineness of the work for such a big bear. It was a bear of a man basically. So he paints with incredible sensitivity, and yeah, he was very, very generous with his time. He gave me a print, which I gave him a print of mine, but he gave me a print of his work, which was lovely. And he was very generous with the kids, and the kids were very taken with him. And yeah, it was a special moment for me.
Thanks, Rob. I keep going. I said I would tell you it's about 10 to 12.
Got my time, yeah. No worries. Well, I'll move on to my stuff now. So let's go. So I'll drag up my stuff now. So yeah, that was it was a great for me. The two things I achieved in that trip were to see the work of Bruno Liljefors's, who I have to admit, seeing stuff in books and seeing stuff in real life, seeing the actual brush strokes, seeing the texture of the paint was a whole different kettle of fish. It was just was wonderful. And then to meet Lars Johnson, yeah, that was probably one of the highlights of my whole life, really. And the family got a lot out of it as well. Anyway, so to me, so I've worked as Marilyn said, I work as a graphic design illustrator in the natural these days, more specifically in conservation and conservation and natural and communications, basically doing interp sort of work, which involves a lot of illustration of animals. So I guess I've done the full gamut of illustration for its own pleasure, illustration for actual specific work, and then right through to personal art, which as I said earlier, hasn't been a big output, but it's been a very passionate and strong part of my output. So here's a range of illustrations I've done for some publications over the years. Did some stuff for natural history, birding books for North American companies, a couple of Australian, actually 3 Australian things here. So that's some of the illustration work, pencil and watercolour studies I've done. But this is sort of going back away. So this is my older work, which is probably influenced by people like, Lars Johnson, et cetera, And so on the left-hand side, these are our bar-tailed godwits.
Rob, you haven't shared your screen.
Oh, shiver me timbers. Sorry. I have to get out. I have to escape to do that. It doesn't come up as a button unless I... Oh, sorry, guys. I won't bore you with that all again.
No, you have to go back to the beginning now.
I'll scoot through it. Okay, there's the beginning. Okay, so, oops, wrong one. Okay, right, so yes, I've done the full gamut, illustration for pleasure, illustration for actual briefs, and right through to personal painting. So in terms of, as an illustrator, I've drawn just about anything and everything over the years, but more recently, as I worked my way into more the area which I love more, which is natural history, I've done a lot of publications for different organisations for Europe, North America, and various bits and pieces. So I have to admit, that's been much more pleasurable. So my later career has been much more satisfying than probably the first 2/3 of my career for that reason. So my early painting is more, a little bit influenced by many people, but particularly this one on the left here of the bar-tailed godwits. They're the long distance record holders. So watercolour, which heavily influenced by Mr. Johnson, I think, but still too tight for my money. The ability to paint loosely is a real challenge. I can't help myself but tighten up and tighten up and tighten up. You need to use bigger brushes and use your left hand or something. I'm not sure what it is. And play around with pastels. I love pastels. The purity of the pigment, the ability to capture movement is great. Watercolor. When I lived in Queensland, this was based on these birds, which are the pied stilts always found around the lagoons around Lota. That's one reason I went there, around the Moreton Bay area, because it was so rich and diverse with bird life and migratory waders, and they were so easy to see there and so accessible. So it was a bit of a highlight being there. But look, Queensland just didn't quite work for me. We missed the change of seasons, I think. So scuttle back to Victoria. That's not all about shorebirds. I'm interested in birds more generally across the board. So this is a watercolour, and probably a painting I've spent more time on one single piece than I ever have. And it was one where the bird was there, but scarlet robin, but red-capped robin, and I've got really caught up in the textures and of the bark, and that became a study in painting of the bark as much as it was of the bird. And I really got absorbed in that. It was one of those ones where days and weeks just disappeared and you didn't even know you were there because you were so absorbed in the piece. Again, another one from Queensland, Stradbroke Island, places like that where these crested terns were always permanent sort of on the beach, and these guys would always get crazily coiffed, and they'd sort of point up to the sky and call. And to me, that's synonymous with driving along the beach or walking along the beach in those Moreton Bay, Fraser Island, places like that. So again, more pastel on the left, Pacific black ducks. Again, using pastel so you can get a bit of movement and softness in the subject matter. Watercolour, a bit more loosely painted, achieved a bit closer to what I'd like to do. Now, recent work. I'm not sure how many of you saw my recent exhibition. So I hadn't really produced much personal work for a long time, but I, over a year ago at Louis Joel's in Altona, I was invited to have an exhibition there. It was only a very short exhibition. It was only ended up being a week. It was meant to be 2 weeks, but I only got 1 weekend there. But look, for me, it was irrelevant. It wasn't a high-profile gallery, a lovely little gallery, great people who run it, but it was really a low-exposure thing. But when I found out I only had a week, I didn't really care. The work took me about 6 months, but most of it was actually done in 3 months, and I'd never had such a intense creative output in my career. So at the age of 60, I had my first one-man show, and I was just I was running on adrenaline. Stuff just, I remember my studio's upstairs, and I remember just running, getting out of bed in the morning and just busting to get up into the studio and just flying up those stairs. So it was great. It was worth it. So I didn't care. What it did for me is it built me a base for the future in terms of what I want to produce. So it was it was based on shorebirds. It was called Here and There, a journey with birds that along our coast, and it was there's a bit of science meets art meets nature, and it was some education involved in it. For instance, this is our largest migratory wader, the eastern curlew, and if you can see, there's a little bit of information there. I'm not trying to really give you too much information that you're going to learn all about the curlew. It's just a few little teasers and a little bit of information. We've got things representing the mathematical precision at which they migrate. There's a bit of information about the distances. The textures are meant to be a little bit of representation of the urban landscape, like a laneway. Is a map, an aerial map to indicate they use land masses to migrate. And this sort of stuff is to indicate, again, the mathematical precision as to how they do these things. And I guess the posters, the torn posters, a little bit of a comment on needing to look. We need to develop up our built-up environments so that we can accommodate wetlands and still keep these places and coexist, not fight against it, but coexist. And all this stuff was painted on recycled panels, plywood panels that I just scrounged from the industrial estates around Williamstown North. So I jokingly say no trees were killed in the production of this artwork. So it ran a little bit. There was some so it was like photo conversions using digital imagery, stenciling. As I said, I'm as influenced by pop art and contemporary street art in some of these things as anything else. So a bit of drawing going on. These are black-tailed godwits, which we don't get around here, but and the numbering refers to the latitudes and longitudes that they and again star charts and land masses, all things that they use in their migration strategies. So it covered a few different styles and approaches. I really like this one. I left the background on this as pretty raw because it was film face plywood, which came from Russia. Most of the plywood comes from Russia, and this would have come on. And I love this the connection with this. So this bit of plywood came on something. It came all the way to Australia, packaging something, and now, so I've repurposed this and painted some birds which fly to Siberia to breed. So I like that connection. It was it's there, it's subtle, but it was a nice bit of synergy, I thought. And the one down here of the greater sand plovers, which we don't get here, but again, there's a bit of information there, just a little bit of a hint of what's going on, and I jokingly call that one, that's my Andy Warhol meets shorebirds, because it's got the half-tone dot going on, which I've always loved as a thing, but it's very much a nod to pop art. And the street art sort of influence here with sort of stick-ups and tear-ups and street posters and stuff like that. So this was all just evolving from, I didn't really have, I had some really pencil sketches on paper before I started, and it just all evolved and developed over a very short period of time. And then, as we were talking earlier about some sculptures, I played around with very, very much along the lines of Alexander Coldor's sort of work. And I played around with, we're not talking major sculptures, we're not talking about forms out of stone or bronzes, but it's pretty well drawing. It's just an extension of what I do already. So it's drawing with wire is the way I'll say these. So they're not really 3D, they're sort of 2.5D, I guess. But that was good fun. I really like playing around with the shapes of these loafing shorebirds. So that was, but that all happened within such a short period of time, and was one of the most enjoyable and intense creative periods of my life. And influences were drawn from lots of different places, and some of them which I've shown you, but only scratched the surface. Okay, I think that's covered it.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's just, I love your artwork. It's just fascinating too how you came to reach this point. We've probably got time just for a quick question, if anybody has a question they would like to ask. Otherwise, I might ask you if you could, if you haven't done already, and you would like to have a copy of the Shorebirds booklet by BirdLife Australia, that's the one, and the Council, and a gift card featuring some of Rob's extraordinary artwork, please do email your address. I know some of you have done that already, so if anyone else would like to do that, that would be good. And thank you, Kerry. I've got a notice from you saying a lovely presentation. And are there any other plans for another exhibition, Rob?
Funny you mention that. It's really weird coming off something which was so intense. There's obviously a flat spot at the end of it. However, and this is the other interesting thing. If you looked at my newer work versus the older work, like a lot of people say, well, I like your old stuff better than your new stuff, because but I'm not in that place anymore. I do not want to do that anymore. I've moved on, and even though you're not producing work, a decade could pass by, and you change the way you visually see things. So it's not an evolution. It's not an evolution that requires physical application of your practice. It actually changes. Influences just pop in, and so I don't know. I surprised myself in terms of where I was and what I was creating, and the way I wanted to do that. So, but I certainly want to keep moving on the shorebird side of things, and wetlands, and maybe I'm interested in plants as well. It's not insects. I'm a keen naturalist in the full gamut, really. So ultimately, I'd like to do some stuff on specifically maybe like Trug Swamp. So Truganina Swamp. Look at the plants. Look at the hydrology of the place. How important those things are, and just work towards, and maybe introduce approach it a bit more scientifically with some information, but not over the top. Someone who inspires me, someone like John Walmsley. His work is very. I look at his work and I'm saying, yeah, I can. That's how I see things. That's how I'd like to work. So I'd like to think I could basically push towards that sort of thing in terms of taking it. But certainly wetlands, shorebirds. But I'm also interested. My sister lives in the Wimmera, and we're about to go for the first time, and we're going to get let out of this ring of steel. And she lives in Dimboola, and they're on the Wimmera River. My brother-in-law has a tinny, and I'm going to jump in that tinny, and in 2 Ks I can be in the Little Desert National Park, and it's white sand, river red gums, Banksia, and it's special country, and I'd like to do something there as well. So lots of things gestating, but I don't know exactly what.
Hey Rob, it's Rob up in Queensland here. G'day,
Hey mate.
Hey, this is maybe not a question, maybe just a quick comment. It's been really interesting with COVID in all sorts of conflicting ways. I saw today that interest in the English birdwatching scene through the SPB website's gone up 70%. At the same time, people are finding an interest in identifying their local wildlife. Our relationship as a nation with China has gone stunningly downhill, and yet you talked about China doing things like dropping food onto mudflats. Must be lots of bird watchers in China. It's frustrating and interesting and conflicting, isn't it, to think that we've got people of like-minded nature in countries that we have conflicts with, and wouldn't it be lovely to be able to communicate with them
Yes.
over those synergies about things like bird travel, which where their movements cross all the boundaries that humans place on the planet. So interesting times. Lovely stuff, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, matey. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, look, it is interesting, actually. There's been a lot of crossover. There's a wonderful print project, the Overwintering Project, which Kate Gorringe-Smith runs. I've actually submitted a couple of prints for that, but it's an international project, and it's exactly that. So people submit prints for the collection, and there's exhibitions all around the world, and it's trying to connect up people from along the flyway in some sort of way so that we can have a united front from a conservation point of view. But I must just indicate, I don't think it was necessarily China that was involved in the food drop. It might have been an international sort of project. China was probably involved. And I suppose that's what we need to remember. While different regime, not all of America is Donald Trump. Not all of China is the Chinese regime. So there's people there who feel strongly about nature and conservation. It's just that China's economy has grown so much, and it is developed so to a massive scale that they had nowhere to go but out. So the coasts have been developed. And one of the ironies is places like North Korea. Rebecca, do you remember? I actually during the trivia night there was the question, because I remembered because I'd heard it, but people were quite surprised at that. But one of the saving graces along the flyway is North Korea's coast, because they haven't been developing. They've got this bit of coast which is untouched. It's not because there aren't conservationists. I mean, unfortunately, they most likely will move to a more developed level. And when they do, unfortunately, their coastline is going to go the same way as China's has.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Does anyone else want to add a last comment? Otherwise, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I thank you, Rob. It's always fascinating listening to you, and I'm learning about birds. I'm a bug person. I love the water bugs that all the birds feed on, and so I'm really looking forward to getting back down to the Wetlands Centre and walking around with Rob, and he can teach me a bit more about the birds that just look like birds to me. And I'm sure if you keep an eye on our Facebook page, Instagram and our website, just Google us, you'll find us. And hopefully next year we'll be full of some exciting events that are actually outdoors. We'll see what we can do. So thank you everyone for coming. And I'll probably let you go and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. It looks like a nice day out there. So
thanks guys. Really appreciate you joining me. I hope, as I said, I didn't know the level of birding across the board, so I hope there was something in there for everybody.
It was fantastic, Rob. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys.
Lovely talk, Rob. Thanks very much.
Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Thank you.
bye.
Thanks, Marilyn.
Thanks, guys. See ya. Bye.
Yeah, down.
See you, mate. Bye.